Welcome into the first official episode of the Whiteout Report podcast here with Proline TV. We're here to talk all things Penn State football all season long. We are your hosts. Some of you watching this may recognize us from the years of Penn State past. I am Marty Leap, formerly of Happy Valley Insider of the Old Rivals Network, as well as Black Shoe Diaries of SB Nation. Here with me, former Penn State beat writer, longtime colleague and friend of mine, Dylan Callahan Crawley. Dylan, I know you're as excited as I am to get this off and running and us be back talking Penn State football again.
Yeah, no, it's good to be talking about the Nittany Lions again for the season. Obviously, we had a great run there with the Happy Valley Insider for a while, but all good things have to come to an end. But yes, I'm just glad to be talking football with you again, Marty. Should be a fun season to talk plenty about the Nittany Lions.
Absolutely. I mean, you and I talked about it throughout the offseason, in various group chats and whatnot, that this should be a really fun season for Penn State. I mean, you go off to, you couldn't ask for a much better start, come out and just throttle a much lesser Nevada team. Maybe most importantly, you get out of it with any sort of injuries. You're looking at getting healthier this week. You bring FIU to town, another game where you're a heavy favorite, another game where it's, hey, let's put some things on tape for teams to worry about. Let's play a clean game. Let's get the backups reps. Let's cultivate that depth and let's get out healthy. And to start it out, I mean, Wednesdays, obviously that's the day anyone who follows Penn State knows you have your open practice availability for the media. And today, two key things that come out of that, Zariah Fisher and Zion Tracy, both back at practice, both projected defensive starters who missed last week. James Franklin did tell the media after practice, we'll start with Tracy, that he's been practicing full bore since Sunday. He will be a full go this week and will be back at his starting nickel position. So a boost for Jim Knowles and his defense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do they need these two to beat FIU on Saturday? No. Do they need them to win next week? No. But these are two guys that they're going to need when Oregon comes to town later this month to win that game. They're going to need these two guys throughout the course of the Big Ten schedule. So again, these two back into the fold now, allowing them to get meaningful reps here over the next 2 weeks before you get into the heart of your Big Ten schedule. I think is really important for Penn State and Jim Knowles. I mean, Zariah Fisher is, I think has a ton of upside as a pass rusher, especially in the Jim Knowles system. You add that he's not going to have to be necessarily that number one pass rusher for Penn State. He is not going to have the attention on him. I think that's going to help him have a big season when he's on the field because you have denied Dennis Sutton. You have, Zane Durant, Alonzo Ford. The list goes on and on. Guys who are going to take up, blocks from the opposing offensive line because this Penn State defense, front seven in general, may not be as talented as it was a year ago, but still very talented. So to get those two back is very big. Zion Tracy, multifaceted, player, makes an impact on defense. We saw his pick six last year against Ohio State, but he has the speed and athleticism to be a game changer too on special teams if his number's called.
Yeah, and I think with Tracy, it's especially important because he missed all the spring recovering from off-season surgery to clean some things up. So, when it's a new defense and you have Tracy who's going to be an important spot in the nickel position, and that's a position that in a Knowles defense traditionally has been very key. It's going to be important to get him those live game reps these next 2 weeks before Oregon comes to town for the whiteout. And, with Fisher, I saw James said after practice, they're hopeful he'll be able to go. I understand being cautious with him, especially with his injury history. He's a guy we haven't seen since 2023, but like you said, that potential's there. In 2023, he played in 13 games, had 3.5 sacks, had 5 tackles for a loss. And, you made a great point too. Denied Dennis Sutton's going to be the focus. And we saw it against Nevada. Even when he's the focus, sometimes it doesn't matter. He's very good. Zane Durant, Chaz Coleman is very quickly becoming the next freak edge rusher at Penn State. I know he wasn't on the stat sheet against Nevada, but if you watch that game, you just saw him all over the place, came real close to blocking a punt, just sky high potential. So those are the guys opposing offenses are going to be concerned about. So that's what makes it so important at that opposite end, at that edge rusher position, more that jack position, as Knowles calls it in his defense. I think Fisher can really thrive at, is to have a guy with the potential to impact the game. They have that in Zariah Fisher there. So, hopefully he can get back out there this week even if he doesn't, I'm sure you'll see him against Villanova. But at the same time, I'm not going to fault the staff for being cautious with Zariah Fisher with his injury history.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, this is a guy who's been, it feels like, consistently banged up in his Penn State career. And he is going to be an important piece to this puzzle, both because of his high upside, but also his presence really does help the depth at that defensive end position. Without him, it is considerably a thinner position for Penn State. But yeah, I expect if he does play, I don't expect him to get a ton of reps against FIU or Villanova. But assuming he does play in one of these games, you're also going to want to get him enough reps so that he's going into that Oregon game not completely rusty, because you will have to be ready to go against the Ducks on September 27th. So that it'll be interesting to see if he does play, how much he does play this week and next week against Villanova.
Yeah, and I think the defense line rotation in general is going to be interesting to watch these next 2 weeks. I mean, last week we saw a lot of the young guys out there. Xavier Gilliam, another guy who they're going to rely on heavily this year as a redshirt freshman, had a very impressive game. Alonzo Ford in a similar boat to Fisher, not as much with the injury stuff, but still working his way back from that torn ACL against Minnesota last year, continuing to get the rust knocked off there. And even some of those younger defensive linemen, who's going to emerge these next 2 weeks as guys that maybe not necessarily against Oregon, because they're really going to tighten down the rotations.
Yeah.
But from that UCLA game on, your Yvonne Kemajos, your Malachi Williams, Owen Wafel, who takes that step, who grabs these positions, that playing time that is there to be had. We know Deion Barnes wants to be able to rotate 4 or 5 deep at both tackle and end if possible. And again, against Oregon, it's going to get tightened up. It's going to be denied down to Sutton. It's going to be Fisher. It's probably going to be Chaz Coleman. But these younger guys, there's opportunity there to be had, and I'm curious to see what the rotations look like with that and who seizes these opportunities these next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, that's the great thing about, this type of schedule for Penn State. Obviously, everybody wants to see Penn State take on some premier non-conference opponents. That's not how the schedule, worked out for this season or most of the upcoming seasons. I know there's a couple Power 4 opponents, I think, mixed in over the upcoming seasons, but not the case this year. But in these type of games, Penn State is going to, like we just saw this past week, get the starters plenty of reps, but you're going to get almost a quarter and a half full of just backups and depth players getting valuable in-game reps that is going to pay off, whether it's this season or in the future. But the next 2 weeks, like you said, gives Penn State a great opportunity to figure out what the rest of that defensive line rotation is going to look like next season. Which players step on the field this Saturday and maybe next Saturday and show that they, when the lights are on, have that next gear in them. Some of these guys may, be guys who look really good in practice, but then when it's another uniform lined up against them, it's a little different. So I'll be very interested to see, like you said, who steps up here. Especially inside. Do we see a guy like Ty Blandon step up? How much of a step up do we see Xavier Gilliam take? I mean, I like Penn State starting defensive tackles. I think depth at the position is okay, but if one of these guys can really assert themselves over the next 2 weeks as a third dude in that room to go along with Alonzo Ford and Zane Durant, I think that would be really big for Penn State as they head into Big Ten play.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially when you're looking, make no doubts about it. They won in their minds. This should be a 16, 17 game season. This is a season that everyone in the Lash building thinks is capable of ending with them playing in the national championship game. And if you're going to do that, you're going to need that depth, right? I mean, we saw it last year against Notre Dame, how banged up both those teams were by the time you got to the Orange Bowl. And, you talk about this depth. Hey, if an Alonzo Ford's healthy and they can rotate a little bit more in that defensive line, if Anthony Donka's out there, who knows? That's where cultivating that depth is going to be so important. So with that about the defense, let's shift to offense. Last week against Nevada, I know you and I talked about this in multiple group chats. It was nice to see receivers who could get separation and catch the ball. Something we've not seen a lot of the last 2 years. Yes, it was just Nevada. Yes, there's every reason to still be hesitant about the receiver room. until we see them do it against an Oregon, against Ohio State, even against an Iowa when they go to Kinnick. All of that said, I remember telling you that touchdown pass right before the half to Kyron Hudson, there's not a receiver on this roster who makes that catch either the last 2 years. That sideline catch Hudson had where he dragged the toe. Some of the plays where Trevor Pena was just so good in the slot, quick hit, quick move, get open, catch the ball, get 8 yards, keep the drive moving. That is something they sorely lacked the last 2 years. And I don't think it's hyperbole to say if they would have had either of those receivers, and this is before even into Devontae Ross, so I think still going to be a big part of this team, just working his way back from injury as well. I think if they have either of those guys in the Orange Bowl last year, they win that game. I'm confident in saying that. I don't think it's a stretch to believe that either.
No, I don't think it is a stretch. And, yeah, I mean, if you're a Penn State fan, you have to love what you saw out of this wide receiver room last week. Kyron Hudson looked great. Trevor Pena looked great. Devontae Ross still coming back a little bit from being banged up. Another guy that, Penn State is going to use a little bit, but they're not going to overuse him these first 3 weeks because it's imperative that he's healthy against Oregon in a couple weeks. Devontae Ross is the type of guy who can take the top off an opposing defense. He can be that game changer down the field. Not that Hudson, Trevor Payne can't be that guy either, but Devontae Ross has that capability to be that guy week in, week out, every snap. But yeah, I really like what we saw out of these 3 wide receivers last week. If they can stay healthy, Penn State has one of the best wide receiver starting trios in the Big Ten, in my opinion. The depth at the position is still, a little bit questionable. Where does Tyzier Denmark fit into all this? Where is Kobe Howard, a true freshman that we hear a lot about coming into the season? I can't remember off the Pro Football Focus numbers if he saw snaps this past week, but did have at least a reception this past week. How does he fit into everything going forward? Liam Clifford, he's been around forever, still a part of that rotation, but what can Penn State expect from him? I still think they have a really good trio in Hudson, Ross, and Pena, but what can those backups and depth pieces at wide receiver do for them going forward? Because you're going to need more than just 3 guys to win over a 16-game season. In the college football playoffs, you're going to need one of those additional guys to step up 1 or 2 times in a game and make a big play. That is what I'm going to be watching very closely, not just these next 2 weeks, but throughout the rest of the season. It's going to be very interesting in that light, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. Kobe Howard. I was surprised by the lack of involvement. Because like you said, we heard a lot of great things about him all off season, all through camp. Still think he's a guy we're going to see some run from either this week or next and see, where the staff's at, if they truly greenlight him or not. And you mentioned the depth of receiver. One thing that I think should be mentioned, not overlooked, not wide receiver, but a tight end. And it's easy to kind of forget about the tight ends because Tyler Warren's gone, but Khalil Dinkins, Luke Reynolds, and Andrew Rappleyea still combined for 6 catches for 68 yards. And I thought Rappleyea, especially after essentially missing all of last season after tearing his knee against WVU, I thought he played really well. I thought he looked really smooth. Coming out of high school, the lazy comparison was Pat Freiermuth, similar builds, same number, both from New England. But he looked like Pat Freiermuth to me. And, it was very similar. So I think the tight ends still provide a lot there as well to help with this receiving depth.
Yeah, it's funny because, I feel like one of the conversations last week or coming out last week, that it felt like a quiet day for the tight ends, but that's because no one tight end really emerged. And we weren't expecting that out of this tight end room. There is not a Tyler Warren in this room. There's 3 really good, tight ends at the top, and it's a really strong room overall. But what I'll be watching in the tight end room this week and next week, or the early parts of the Big Ten schedules, which tight end emerges as the guy in the room, because they have 3 really good guys at the top, like I said, including Dinkins, Luke Reynolds, and Andrew Rappleyea. Which guy is going to emerge as the go-to tight end? Is it going to be Dinkins, who has, paid his dues. He's been patient to be the guy. Is it now his turn? Or is it going to be one of the younger bucks in Andrew Appiah or Luke Reynolds, the true sophomore, who really flashed at times as a true freshman? He's probably the most athletic of the three. I'm not even probably is the most athletic of the three in that room. So I'll be interested to see who emerges as the go-to tight end. But overall, I wouldn't be shocked if at the same time if there really isn't a go-to guy this season and they all kind of end up in the same, receptions and receiving yards range by the end of the season.
Yeah, and I think that's where coming into the season, people are thinking, oh, what was it with Warren last year? 100-some catches, over 1,000 yards. You can replace that with 3 or 4 guys between tight end and receiver. Yeah. And I think they're on their way to doing that. I mean, you mentioned Reynolds. I'd argue last year he made maybe the biggest play of the regular season on that fake punt against Minnesota. Right. There's a good shot they don't win that game if he doesn't do that. And it just who knows where things go from there for them. Right. So, yeah, it's a very intriguing group. I mean, as you mentioned, Reynolds, the most athletic. He was the 5-star of the group. The potential is sky high. So that's going to be something else to watch this week. I think offensively, just real quick, got to touch on Drew. I thought his decision-making was phenomenal against Nevada, reading the field, knowing when to tuck and go. I saw a lot of improvement, in my opinion, from that area last year. So excited to see if that can continue this Saturday. Against an FIU team that, I mean, obviously, again, like Nevada, they leave a lot to be desired. But Willie Simmons is a good football coach. He did a lot of good things at a Florida A&M program that does not have a lot of resources to work with. He was Manny Diaz's running back coach last year, so some ties there to Penn State. So he's learned from some great coaches. So curious to see how Drew does. But I think one thing I'm going to watch very closely Saturday, especially with the forecast, because it looks like it's going to rain. Not that they played poorly, but I thought the offensive line definitely left some meat on the bone against Nevada. Now, some of it was that's early in the game, they were rotating through those top 7-8 guys like crazy. Again, against a different opponent, you're going to have your best 5 out there with maybe Cooper Cousins rotating in. So I'm curious how that goes, but I definitely think last week they finished with just 3.8 yards per carry. Katron Allen was the only back to average over 5, actually only back to average over 4 yards a carry, let alone 5 yards a carry. So I think you want to see a little bit more push there from the line on Saturday. But again, some of that's nitpicking too, because it seemed to me against Nevada from the get-go, the game plan was, hey, let's get these receivers involved. Let's build that rapport between them and Drew in a game. Let's get that confidence up. And that seemed to be a bigger goal for them on Saturday than just coming out, pushing Nevada around and running the ball. So I will be curious to see if we can see a little bit better offensive line play, because I truly believe this offensive line is capable of capturing the Joe Moore Award this year.
Yeah, and that's going to be my counterpoint there. Is I 100% agree with that. That seemed like their game plan. But at the same time, coming into this season, we talked about this offensive line being potentially one of the best in the country, if not the best in the country. It feels like that should be an offensive line that even if they're not, going out there trying to run the ball down the opposing team's throat, that they should still be able to open up holes. But at the end of the day, 3.8 yards per carry last week is just not going to get it done going forward. So I would like to see Penn State be more assertive in the run game this week. I think they absolutely need to be. A good offensive line is able to be assertive against every level opponent. Obviously, you're going to need to be assertive against Oregon, against Ohio State later in the season to win those games. If you can't do it against Nevada, if you can't do it against FIU, if you can't do it against Villanova, you're going to have a really hard time against those teams. Now, we've seen the past too. Penn State's rushing attack looks mediocre against a poor opponent, but then, against the top tier opponents, it explodes, right? So it's going to – I've learned not to take too much into account from those games with Penn State's offensive line, but I would definitely like to see them play a little bit better in that regard this week. Going back to Drew quickly. I thought last week against Nevada he was great, 22 for 26, 217 touchdown. What I look for in these games against this level opponent is to be efficient in limited opportunities. 26 passing attempts is probably more than I would have expected him to throw in a game against Nevada. But at the same time, I think, for what he was asked to do last week, he was fantastic. that will certainly get it done against any caliber opponent. But yeah, if that is a sign of things to come for Drew this year, Penn State's offense is going to be really hard to beat with this improved passing attack.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like I said, looking back on it, maybe we shouldn't be so surprised by the way they threw the ball because, hey, first live game action with these new receivers. And you mentioned 26 attempts, 22 completions. Well, 13 of the completions were to Hudson or Pena. He had one to Devontae Ross. So, I mean, it was targeting the guys a lot. So I think that was definitely part of the game plan from Andy Kotelnicki going in.
And I will say the one thing we really didn't see last week was Penn State looking to throw the ball downfield. So I'll be interested to see if we see more of that this week. I mean, last week, I think Drew attempted one pass at 20-plus yards downfield. They're going to have to, they're going to have to extend the field in the passing attack later in the season. So I'll be curious to see if we see any of that over the next 2 weeks. I think they're keeping it vanilla last week for obvious reasons. I expect the next 2 weeks to be vanilla again. But I think there has to be at least some confidence in that deep passing attack before the Oregon game. So I'll be looking for some of that to be more involved this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's always tough this time of year because you want to be vanilla. You want to leave some things in the bag, but at the same time, and I think they found a good balance of this last week, especially that first drive or two where they seem to be just going crazy through one formation after another. You still want to put a lot on tape that teams have to prepare for, but you still want to have some tricks up your sleeve, for when it is late in the game against Oregon, against Ohio State, and be able to pull those out. So that said, we will get ready to wrap things up here. We'll give some predictions for Saturday. Let's go, Dylan. I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, and I apologize for that. But we'll say, I can go first if you want. Let's go with an offensive MVP, a defensive MVP, and a score prediction.
Offensive MVP. That's a good question. Let's go with Katron Allen, offensive MVP. Katron, it feels like the last few years, Katron is the more consistent of the two running backs. Nick has the better chance to have that explosive game. But I think Katron has a nice game this weekend, goes over 100 yards. So let's go with Katron there. Defensive MVP. Let's go with it's a good one. Dominic DeLuca. I feel a big game coming out of Dominic DeLuca there. I think you could easily call Dom the captain of that defense. He is the emotional leader of that defense. So I'm expecting big things out of him this week and going forward. And then in terms of game predictions, give me Penn State to win this one. I think the spread is 45 points?
Somewhere around there. Last time I looked, I think it was 44.5.
Yeah, I don't know if I like Penn State by that much, just because I think they're going to be vanilla again. This FIU team is I think, going to be a pretty good team this year. But let's go 45-10.
All right, I like it. So offensively, I'm going to say Trevor Pena has another big game for Penn State. I think this is one I wouldn't be surprised to see him go over 100 yards potentially. As they continue to work the receivers in. Defensively, I feel like he was so close last week to just putting on a show. I'm going to say Chaz Coleman. I think now that he's got a game under his belt, some of that hesitation, that sort of thing will be worked out, and I can see him exploding, one or two of those kind of like highlight sack TFL kind of plays. Yep. And then score, I'll say 49-10, just to be a little bit different. I was thinking along the same lines at 45-ish to 10, but I'll say 49-10 for Penn State on Saturday. So, Dylan, unless you have anything else, I think that'll do it for this week. For those of you, whether you watched live, came back and watched, anytime between recording it Wednesday night and kickoff on Saturday, we appreciate it. So the Whiteout Report podcast, we're going to be doing this every Wednesday throughout the season, previewing the upcoming game. And then, 20 to 30 minutes or so after every game concludes on Saturdays, we'll be going live on YouTube, courtesy of our friends at ProLine TV. So please make sure you subscribe, make sure you join the YouTube channel, get signed up for our premium post-game live show for Penn State fans everywhere to enjoy, especially if you're anyone who was with Dylan and I, part of our board. We had a great board at Happy Valley Insider. If you're back with us again, we appreciate it. If you're new, we appreciate you being here. Tell your friends, spread the word. And we'll catch up with you guys after the game on Saturday. Have a good one, everyone, and enjoy your college football weekend.
Should be a good one.
Yeah, should be.